Hello and welcome to the third in the series of business resilience webinars. I'm here joined with Nick Collins, who's the President of the Americas for Telstra, and we're so thrilled to be presenting this to members and friends of the AAA in these really interesting and unprecedented times. Nick, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We've been bombarded with some really amazing questions, so I know everyone's super excited to learn more about what you've been up to and to get your take on a lot of key things around connectivity. Fantastic. Well, so to talk a little bit about why we're here. This was a particularly important topic for the AAA right now, and I know to many of our constituency, people around the world have had to shift to completely online communications, video only, and to really change the nature of day-to-day interactions to protect the health and safety of society throughout this pandemic. It's really something that we haven't encountered before as a society. It's hitting us on levels that touch on work, school, play, and really every facet of human experience. And people have been working from home, and it's different and it's trying at times. But as a result of all of this change, telecommunications services have become even more integral to our everyday lives, putting increased importance on ensuring the reliability and the resiliency of internet connectivity and global networks. So Nick, welcome. Perfect person to be chatting about this really critical topic. I'll give a little bit of an overview about Nick for those of you who don't know his full and impressive bio. Nick Collins is the President of the Americas for Telstra. He's based in San Francisco. We were just chatting before that while that means amazing things in the winter for us New Yorkers and a lot of jealousy, not so much during the summer. But Nick commenced this role in July of 2018 and is responsible for Telstra's business across the region. Previous to taking on this role, Nick was based in Hong Kong, where he held the role of worldwide head of customer and sales operations for Telstra's $8 billion enterprise division. This followed 3 years based in Singapore, where he was head of Asia and head of Southeast Asia with responsibility for the sales org across the dynamic growth markets in APAC. Nick relocated to Singapore following a period as Director of Business Development for the EMEA region based in London. Nick is a Telstra veteran, having joined the business in the London office in 1999 to establish a practice focused on the travel and transportation sector. Prior to joining Telstra, Nick worked in various management roles for Hyatt International Hotels across Australia and Europe, and holds a bachelor's degree from Griffith University in Australia. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. You know, speaking for everyone who's attending here, we really appreciate you taking this time to have this conversation with everyone this evening.
Oh, look, it's my pleasure, and thank you for that very warm introduction, Tania. It's great to be here and an opportunity to talk to everyone, and also thank you to you for the work you do as a board member of the AAA, and obviously the success that you've seen as founder and CEO of Shareablee as well. So, you know, Telstra is a good Australian organisation. We value our relationships with the AAA, and look forward to doing more with you and the team moving forward as well. Maybe just a couple of opening comments from my side then, if that's appropriate, Tania, just in terms of how we see the world at the moment, you know, in I guess relation to the topic of resilience that we're talking about. And I think first things first, you know, I've been here in the United States, living here and calling it home for just on 2 years, and it's actually not uncommon for me to bump into people who are generally sometimes not aware that Telstra is even here in America. And secondly, you know, what we actually do here in the region. It's also not uncommon that sometimes we get mistaken for a company that makes cars with a similar name to Telstra. So among other things today, I'm hopeful that we can give some clarity on actually what Telstra does here in America. And in fact, last year was when we celebrated our 25th year of being here. And today we've got offices and network locations right across the country. It's probably also worth noting that, you know, Telstra is clearly a famously Australian brand. We are also a truly global company with a presence in more than 20 countries, 3,000 people. And a lot of people are not also aware that, you know, we've been operating outside Australia for over 70 years. So our expertise working outside Australia is long. And also what we do across our international business, and certainly sitting here in the United States, it is a little different to what we do in Australia. So a lot of people know us. If you've lived in Australia or you spent time in Australia, you'll know Telstra as it relates to what we do in Australia. But outside Australia is a little different. You know, we're very much a B2B organization. We work with big businesses in terms of helping them to connect their offices around the world, and specifically across the Asia Pacific region, but we'll come back to that maybe a little shortly. But in terms of the resilience topic that this series is focused on, I guess there's really three aspects that, you know, I wanted to sort of, you know, walk through today. And first one is around how actually crises bring us together and how we can overcome even the biggest challenges with the right purpose. And I feel like we're all experiencing a lot of this right now. The second for me is the role that technology is going to play in that, and actually how technology is empowering us to adapt and connect and thrive through these set of circumstances that you described up front, Tania, just in terms of, you know, this unprecedented nature of what's happening around the world. And probably finally, you know, also then as a business and as a business community, how we have to invest in creating resilient businesses for the future. Because I think a lot of us now have to start thinking, you know, what's actually ahead of us. And the stories I'll share today, and I've seen some of the Q&A, so we'll try and weave in as many stories as we can, because I think stories help bring things to life. You know, we'll give some examples, and we'll talk about things across both our Australian business and our international business and across our networks. But I guess for me, thinking about crisis in terms of my first point around resilience, and many Australian companies, many on this call, like Telstra, who call Australia home, or US businesses that have operations in Australia, know crisis because we've been through quite a bit, even in the last year. And as I watched the images recently of some wildfires here in California, it made me think about the bushfires that raged across Australia earlier this year. It seems like a lifetime ago, but
A lifetime ago, doesn't it? Yeah.
Really only in March. And those bushfires, you know, they burn through 50,000 square miles of land. And you think sitting here in Cali, you know, that's about the third the size of this state. Extraordinary situation down there. And for many during the fires that, you know, took place in Australia, the Telstra network at that time in Australia was the only way for communities to connect and actually receive emergency information at that time. You know, so we had a team of people right across the nation working hard to support those communities across Australia during this time, but also to help recover the services, even sometimes when their own homes or families were at risk. And, you know, some of the things that we did, I think, to support, you know, the communities, you know, at that time, you know, things like, for example, the critical services of our payphones across Australia, we basically made those free just to enable communities to contact each other, call your loved ones. And you know, staggering over 1 million calls were made over that period using that infrastructure. And that was all available free to Australians. You know, disaster assistance packages that were made available. And also, I think, remarkable, right? We saw the remarkable scenes of all the volunteer firefighters and the professional firefighters and the emergency service teams on the front lines in the bushfires who were at it for weeks, arguably. And Telstra, we stepped in to make sure all their mobile phone bills were covered, you know, for the duration of those events as well, just as a means to help. And I think for us, you know, we do these things because they are the right thing to do. We do these things because it aligns with our company purpose and values, which are very important for us as an organization. Because arguably it's also the sort of things that Australians trust Telstra to do when times are tough. And this isn't the first set of bushfires we've had. It's obviously something we've contended with previously in Australia. But also sitting here in America, it was also really remarkable to see how the Australian community here and also friends of Australia rallied around to support Australia during that period as well. And some of the great fundraising that happened here in the United States to support the many great causes for those people who needed a hand during those events. But as we know, and as you alluded to as well, that disasters and events and major circumstances keep coming at us this year. It seems like 2020 has been the year, and The second one for me around technological resilience has really come to the fore during COVID-19. And the fact we're doing this in the form of a webinar is also probably illustrative of the change in circumstances. But for us, when COVID-19 sent workers out of their offices and into their homes, people wanted one thing more than masks, gloves, and toilet paper. They wanted data. And while we've been ensuring the health and safety of our team, and that's critically important for us at Telstra, what we have seen is this explosion in demand for data, which has set new records on our networks, and has seen our teams working around the clock to make sure we've got the ability to support the demands that we have as a result of the pandemic. And if you think about what's driving that demand, there's probably three categories which probably all resonate well with us. And one is that the increase in video calling, whether that's for work, social, or kids at home learning school. That's been a really big ramp up from the environment we're in now to what we were before. The surge in demand for being entertained while you're in lockdown or you're confined to your home. So, streaming content.
Being able to escape, while you're there, right?
And gaming, right? If you've got kids, interactive gaming has been obviously a really big uptick as well during this period. But also in the corporate context, it's also around, companies moving increasingly their businesses to online. So the software as a service platform is also sort of all contributing to this demand we're seeing on this network. And another sort of fun fact for Telstra is that across the world, we operate over 250,000 miles of subsea cable infrastructure that actually delivers the internet that enables all of this to happen. And sort of, I think the basic math on 250,000 miles is it's enough to go around the world 10 times. And you might not necessarily think about it though, right? But when you sort of open your work emails or you web browse your favorite news sites from Australia in the US, or you stream your favorite show from the UK, or you're doing your gaming with people sitting in Korea or Indonesia, a good amount of that data and interaction is actually traveling along these fiber optic cables that are threaded under the ocean floor, just like a web. And that's really critical to how the internet comes together. And of course, people then say, like, I'm telling you, probably say, but Nick, how fast is this to get information across these cables? And the reality is you can take a keystroke from your laptop sitting in New York to Sydney faster than you can blink your eye. So it's fast.
Pretty amazing. Yeah. And I think people wouldn't even think about the ocean floor as something that's within the realm of what you're thinking about. It's a pretty surreal concept when you're explaining it to me.
Oh, it totally is. And I think through the powers of our technology, Melanie, maybe you can help us just bring up, an illustration of this to talk about actually how this actually network comes together. And what you're seeing here is an illustration of the map of the world clearly, but also where all the cables laying on the ocean floor actually exist today. And you can see that these cables, they connect continents, they connect countries, and they connect communities, and they arguably connect corporations as well. And if you think about all of this infrastructure, this is effectively what powers the internet as it stands today. And it's sometimes a myth that actually a lot more goes over satellite technology than it really does. The reality is over 90% of our internet operates across the infrastructure you see today. And Telstra's role is largely focused on the Trans-Pacific, so connecting the US to Asia, and across Asia. So if you're focusing here on Asia, about 1/3 of all the internet traffic across the Asia Pacific region is carried on Telstra's network. Wow. So if you assume that there's about 2 billion people across that region, that's a big responsibility that is absolutely not lost on us in terms of the role that we play, but as do a lot of other telecoms operators, because as you look at this is an industry commitment to, and obviously a lot of international telecoms and local telco operators contributing to this. And then on the next slide is what we have to sort of bring out when we are doing work on these cables. Because the problem with subsea cables and all that we've seen is that they can get damaged. And they get damaged by natural disasters. They get damaged by ship anchors. They get even damaged by sea fishing nets. So for us, the Asia Pacific region where we're really focused, it's arguably home to, incredible underwater seismic activity, the super typhoons that play havoc with telecoms infrastructure. So having these ships out there, laying obviously new infrastructure, but when we do get breakages in our cable, which does happen for a whole bunch of those reasons, we dispatch these ships. They basically are reconnecting or connecting the cables that may have been broken, and not forgetting that some of these cables can be thousands of feet down on the ocean floor. And the picture on the right there is an illustration of the subsea cable as it's getting prepared to be laid across the ocean floor. So critical infrastructure that effectively supports the internet as we know it today. And of course, as these ships were operating, as they have been through the pandemic, as countries went into lockdown, it meant that we had some additional challenges about how we're getting crews out to these ships, how we were getting ships restocked, because we had now additional complexities with restrictions related to the pandemic across many countries. And this is, I guess, another area where resilience really has to come to the front in terms of how you respond quickly to what are very fast-moving circumstances, but also the necessity of ensuring connectivity continues. Thanks, Mel. And this probably then leads to my final point, and then I'll pause. It's around, what we see as resilience moving forward, and the future that we need to think about as a business and as Telstra, but also as a broader business community. But for Telstra, for us, that means understanding the potential disruptions and changes in the world, and also that of our customers. And that means we have to invest in things that are going to empower change moving forward. And we've recently started doing some work with the Business Council of Australia to start mapping out some of the tangible ways to put Australia at the forefront of a digital future. So not only that we can come out of this stronger, but we do so in a way that's just more than just a bounce back. And we've, I guess, focusing on 5 areas of reform, which we're starting to share. And our CEO, Andy Penn, has started to talk a little bit about these as well. And I quickly, they're around about how we're going to enable the transition to a digital economy, because clearly online has had a major boost through this pandemic. The acceleration of digital transformation within organizations has also had a boost. So how do we continue to drive this transition to this digital economy? Investing in the technology infrastructure that's going to empower the change. And we'll touch on that in a second. But also for me, it's also touches on around the regulation around key digital services. Arguably, this is going to force some review and some thinking around what are the appropriate regulations that need to underpin businesses as we think about things moving forward. Cybersecurity is probably the 4th, and how we're going to boost cybersecurity. That's a very topical one at the moment. But also upskilling, how we're going to upskill Australia's population with the right training to adapt and thrive in what is obviously going to be a new look world on the other side of this pandemic. And if we sort of take 5G, and 5G is a very topical issue, not just in Australia, but obviously here in America. If the COVID-19 has shown us anything, is that the increase in demand for data isn't going away, and new technologies like 5G, which we're now deploying across Australia, and I think as of now there's about 8 million Australians with access to 5G. It's going to enable some of that technology change that is going to think about how we're going to support businesses and communities moving forward. And I think other things that we're focusing on as part of this, looking forward, is considering that how we play a role in supporting youth in terms of mental health. And there's some work that Telstra is doing in Australia now around supporting youth, particularly as we've seen such a prevalent topic, through the pandemic. And what I think is also really cool is that we've done some amazing work with the Australian Ballet about how they've been doing some youth mentoring virtually. And I think if you're into ballet, or you just want to see the marvels of young people and how they've adapted to technology, I'd urge you to check out that. But what's clear for us at Telstra is that we can either go back to the way things were, or we can build on the innovation that we've seen, and we can build on the mindset changes that we've seen, that have obviously seen so many positive changes through this pandemic. But, arguably we're acknowledging that we're going through probably one of the biggest disruptions in a generation, but how do we actually see we can come out of this differently from where we went in? So let me just pause there, Tania, and let me hand back to you.
Thank you. My goodness. Well, firstly, thank you for that, really amazing explanation of what's sort of across your aperture right now. It's, it's a pretty broad view when you think about everything from infrastructure to sort of understanding the consumer. There were a couple of things that really resonated with me, when you were talking around understanding the disruptions to your customers, and thinking about, that empathy for your customers and for your community, which I think is going to be a huge difference maker. And really, owning and being brave enough to sort of not just think about reverting back to how things were, as if that were even a true possibility. And we know lots of companies are trying it, right? When's everything going to go back to the way they were? And it's sort of a little bit of a pipe dream, but I think it's one that many people are still betting on. But really, navigating that uncertainty and in the resilience in that context is knowing that you sort of don't have the exact answers of what society will be after this, but knowing that, you're leaning into that and really innovating through that is really inspiring, and just a really great segue, I guess, into some of the questions that came through. So we'll switch to some of those discussion points. You talked a lot about some of what Telstra has already done to respond to COVID-19. I guess, what have you been most proud of in terms of how you've responded or how your business has adapted to support the community?
So look, I think for me, I think what's important to any company's response is linked back to the purpose and the values you have as an organization. And I think, many companies, and I think as you've seen, and I think is what we see very well across many companies in America, your purpose and values is very prevalent. So I think anchoring ourselves to that at Telstra has been really important. And for us, that's super clear, right? It means that our focus is around how we're connecting people. And clearly during COVID, how we've connected people has been a huge responsibility. Whether it's the bushfires as well, right? It's just how that connectivity and that connection helps people, and that internally actually becomes a really strong rallying call for Telstra people, right? It's a way that rallies the organization to respond in these circumstances, and I'm sure it's the same across many organizations. And if you've seen all the stories around things that have just gone online and digital and virtual during this period, people are getting married, virtually having virtual wedding ceremonies, it's how families are connecting. It's how, people are being educated. And I think you see the move to kids learning at home or remote learning, the role that technology plays in, that's really powerful because that impacts kids and it impacts young people in a way. So I think how we responded to make sure connectivity is always available is probably one of those things that stands out for me about being proud, certainly reflecting on the period that has been for the last few months.
You said something that was, I think, really important, where you talked about giving your team something to rally around at this time. I mean, can you talk a little bit about, how your response speaks to Telstra's view on culture, and what effect you think that this is having on staff morale and just, the feeling of employees? Because, without the ability to all be together, I'm sure that that's something that's particularly top of mind right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess sometimes, culture is a tricky one to answer because it means different things to different people. But for me, I guess I'm incredibly proud about how we've come together, during this period. And, when we talk about this, for us, that's across countries as well, right? It's not that we have all people in one location. Like many large organizations, you've got a very dispersed workforce. And if we think about our vision is really about creating this brilliant connected future. So everybody will see that different, and that's even from street to street, people will see and experience that differently. And you can see even here in the US with the experience of COVID, it's different between counties, cities, and states. And so while, we're very aware of this. You know, we recognize that, you know, the role we play about keeping everybody connected is paramount and it has to stay paramount. And as leaders of businesses and of teams, we've got to make sure we're supporting our people and to encourage them to do exactly that. And recognizing that the challenges that many people are facing around, for example, around mental health, do come into the workplace. So as leaders, how do we support people to adapt to these changing circumstances so they're also well equipped to help, you know, their colleagues, but also customers within our organizations as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great perspective. I know, you know, many business leaders have talked a lot about, you know, just even how to keep in touch with how your teams are doing. You know, there's the thing that you can do in person, like take someone for a quick coffee, right? Which you can't sort of do, you know. So it really puts a lot of things around leadership and resilience to the test. No, thank you for that. I guess, has anything surprised you on a personal level, or, you know, what would you say is your biggest learning during COVID-19?
Oh, wow, there's a lot. I guess a few things stand out for me. Like, I've always been one of those people who likes to be in the office in a really busy environment. So this came as a complete shock to me. You know, I've never been a home worker. I've never been a remote worker. So this has required me to personally adapt to a very new way of operating, and learn new habits, which truthfully, I probably never thought I would have to have learned as fast as we have. So I think that's, for me, has been a big one. I think the other thing for me personally would be how you separate your work time and your personal time.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yeah. How have you looked at that?
I think I've mastered that, but I'm trying to get better. And look, and for me, introducing, you know, that space, you know, to find time to exercise and just carving out time whenever is most appropriate, to make sure that you're getting that break from the work routine. And clearly, in some parts of the world, and here in certainly in San Francisco, where you've had lockdown, that's also been challenging because it's not necessarily always possible to leave the house. So how you've adapted to that has been really quite something. And I guess also, probably like most business people, this is the longest time I think I've ever stood still without business travel, probably ever in my career. So there's been absolutely no excuse not to think about new hobbies or learning something new. And
did you have a new hobby? Is there one that you can share?
I'm actually trying to get better with cooking. I actually made myself a commitment at the outset of this that I would not rely on Uber Eats all the time, and I would make a greater effort on cooking, and that's coming along pretty well, actually. I'll be ready to host people when we're allowed to do so.
Listen, that's not nothing, right? A win is a win. That's great. So you mentioned up front, you know, there's sort of a situation, if you will, where many Australians might be surprised to know the degree to which Telstra is here in the US. So can you talk a little more about the investments that Telstra is making in the US to sort of support greater connectivity to Australia and the rest of the world? Like, can you just educate us a little more on, you know, what you're actually doing on the ground here?
Yeah, and totally keep me honest with jargon and technology talk that doesn't make sense as well, please, Tania. So look, I think for us here in the United States, as I alluded to, we've just turned over our 25 years, and we're arguably more buoyant with the opportunity here in the US than at any of that previous time. Last week, we announced some further investments here in the United States on a couple of fronts. One is additional trans-Pacific capacity. So this is more subsea cables that I showed you on that previous diagram, but connect
that guy with all of the cords. And yep, got it.
So more of that, connecting the United States to Australia and Asia. And we're really excited about that. So as you see demand increasing, we've got to continue to make sure there's enough of that cable capacity. So 1.5 terabits of capacity, which is a lot, is going to be coming online in the next 6 months. We also announced new network infrastructure in Hillsborough in Oregon and in Los Angeles in Southern California to further expand, because we're seeing a lot of demand coming out of the Pacific Northwest and out of Southern California. And if you think of the sort of companies that typically operate in these areas, they're the ones driving a lot of demand. So how we continue to scale to put more investment into the United States is really important. And that also means then about where we have people. So with office expansions into Chicago and some other parts of the US, it's been really important for us to get that geographic presence right. Because for us, being close to our customers is also a really important thing in normal circumstances. When you need to have proximity to some of your key clients as well.
No, of course. And so, I mean, 25 years, congratulations. That's huge. I mean, can you tell us a little more about the types of customers that you serve here?
Yeah, they typically fall into a few categories. So if you think about technology companies, would probably a really important one for any tech company. And obviously the US is headquartered to some of the biggest of these in the world. Those companies that deliver services across the internet. So if you think about the content streamers, cloud providers, gaming and e-commerce, a lot of the companies that your organization works with, it's how we support them, giving their content across the Pacific into Australia and Asia is important. Second one is around financial services, because clearly, access to financial services, around transacting across international markets is really important. Connecting stock exchanges is critical for a lot of these firms. Broadcast media is another. So again, the US is really home to a lot of great broadcast media organizations. So how we continue to support them in terms of distributing their content across the globe. Other telecom operators is obviously a really important customer group for us here as well, because it may not also be known, but whether it's a telco like Telstra or a telco like a Verizon or an AT&T or one of these guys that we're familiar with in the United States, we all work incredibly close together. So how we work together to support each other is really important. So we've got some terrific customer relationships across that portfolio as well. And also we were starting to do some new work across the US federal government. So how we're going to continue to think about how we support the requirements of the US federal government. So typically those sort of 5 clusters of customers would be where we're serving today.
Got it. That segues, I think, really well into one of the questions that we had. And I know you mentioned up front that you've seen data usage spike. I know, some research that we've done at my company, Shareablee, has shown as the pandemic was breaking, social media usage went up. I think people at the time, even months into the pandemic, were self-reporting to check their phones about COVID news every hour. So what sort of trends have you seen in terms of data usage, and I guess what's the impact on your network there?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. It's, we've seen the demands obviously increase significantly. And it is from, those technologies that we spoke around before. It is around the content.
Gaming, yeah.
It is around the social media. It's about corporations increasingly moving to video. It's about, the Zoom calls we were doing to connect with our families and friends. And I think as a collective, this is where we're seeing this, almost uptick of 50% demands across the network. And how we're going to continue to scale and support that is something that's very front of mind for us. And that sort of links back to that previous investment conversation that we're making here in the region. But we don't see this actually becoming less. So the challenge for us as an industry is how we continue to support this. And we often say sometimes in Telstra that actually, do we see a scenario where we actually come out of the other side of this actually being more connected than we were before, even as colleagues and even as with customers, because the engagements we're having with each other now are far more immersive and focused than probably what they were before. So does this set a whole new set of patterns for how we're going to work and socially engage with people moving forward as well? And who knows, but we need to be prepared as an industry for how this is going to unfold.
Well, and I think, as many companies are really grappling with, survival, candidly, I think thinking about how you come out of this stronger, or how society comes out of this in a better position is certainly a lens that we need to hear more about, because I think a lot of it is very doom and gloom right now.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're touching on this, like, this is not changing, right? It's many large companies who you would never imagine would talk about supporting remote work for the long term. You know, and I know just even here in New York, some large media companies have all said, look, hey, we're not even coming back into the office this year. So with remote working looking to stay for the foreseeable future, you know, what's Telstra doing to support this work trend? You know, you've already mentioned that you're definitely investing in the US and in infrastructure, but is there anything else that you're doing to sort of make sure that, you know, our Zoom calls don't drop, and, you know, God forbid, when I'm going onto Twitch to stream my gaming, that anything glitch for a second? You know, what does that look like?
Yeah, and obviously Zoom glitches are not just because of the role that we play as a telecom
That
operator.
is true. Yes, that is true.
There's a number of dimensions on that, including your local ISPs or your local cable companies, and obviously, you know, how many people are trying to do the same thing in the house at the same time.
And it turns out user error is quite a thing, I think, as well. So
that's right, because we know that as families are increasingly, you may have, you know, two adults working from home, and then you've got kids learning or gaming at home. You know, the demands on the infrastructure at home are also important. But, you know, for me, you know, as well, I think Gartner's done some research recently, and that, you know, they're saying that somewhere about 90% of the workforce is now effectively in a remote working arrangement for COVID. And I think for us, you know, remote working in terms of how we manage it ourselves as an organization, but also how we support our customers to adapt to this, is something that's going to be very front of mind. And also, I think there's this change in mindset for people who've probably never worked at home as much as they did before, that now they've had a taste for it. Is this something I would like to continue doing more often?
I know, I mean, that's what we've been hearing. You know, I know with the companies that we partner with, some smaller, some much larger, you know, I think the first few weeks, everyone was like, no worries, I think we can handle a couple weeks, but thank goodness we're going to go back to the office. And that shifted to, gosh, I don't even think I could imagine doing my 2-hour commute from Connecticut or whatever it is, you know, every day. Like, gosh, I'm actually really liking this whole new rhythm. And it's, you know, I don't know that it goes back to how it was. And I think a lot of people will be not feeling, you know, at a minimum, not feeling safe, but at a maximum, actually preferring to be at home, irrespective of whether it's, you know, it's okay to do it. So it definitely changes things.
Yeah, and I think I personally think so as well. Like for my previous comment, you know, do I see a scenario if and when we go back to the office, I spend more time at home? Probably yes, right? I think the focus time you also get, you know, in these different working arrangements is certainly more evident. But I think as organizations, there's a couple of things that you need to consider in that context. And we're seeing this working with some of our customers in Australia, and that's, you know, the implications around how do corporations actually make sure the right infrastructure is in place to help their people work, you know, successfully from home for the long term. It's not just a temporary arrangement, but this is a permanent arrangement. And there's obviously a lot of corporate security issues that go hand in hand with that. So, you know, corporations are going to have to understand what the role of IT is going to play in this space, because it's going to take a focus as well in that area to ensure that if more people are working from home, that security is also very front of mind.
Secure and safe to do so. No, of course. And I mean, along those lines, I guess, given greater digitization, how do we protect ourselves better from hacks? You know, I know I think a day ago, there was the big Twitter hack with, you know, that was breaking news. I mean, does Telstra have any experience to share on that front?
Well, I think it's, well, I guess while the workforce of the world is say, somewhat productive at home, it also arguably did unleash some malicious cyber attacks as well that we're seeing across the world. And I think we've seen recently in the news with the Australian Prime Minister highlighting a number of major cyber attacks that are putting pressure on critical infrastructure and public services in Australia. And that's obviously very, very serious. The majority of organizations, like Telstra, have implemented their business continuity plans really quickly. But it's probably fair to say that, you know, the word pandemic wasn't explicitly in those BCPs. And, you know, the reality is that organizations are going to have to make this more explicit as we think about what robust BCPs look forward to. But, you know, certainly we're seeing a reliance on VPNs, you know, from a corporate applications perspective, skyrocket. We're seeing organizations thinking about how they need to create more software to enable them to remote working, you know, the tools that we're using now and others. There's the challenges also around bringing your own device into the organization, and how you actually keep those secure and safe, and they don't compromise the integrity of your corporate networks. So I think there's a lot to happen in this space, and we believe, I think it's Telstra's view, that we see that during COVID-19, we've learned a lot as a business community around how we adapt, but the investment that's going to have to come in security in particular to accommodate, you know, a more prevalent remote working force is probably going to be something that we're going to have to see is going to increase, given the importance of security to many organizations.
Oh, indeed. And I'll tackle one of the questions that came in too. And to the extent that people will be returning to outdoor venues and going to live sports again, which we're starting to see become a little more of a reality, not fully yet, but we're getting there. Can you talk a little about what Telstra does in the sports and entertainment venue space? Is it about consumer 5G connectivity or POS media?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, it's a bit of all of the above. Australians are very passionate about their sport, much like the Americans are. And I think a lot of people have been missing broadcasts of live sport on their televisions. And look, and happily it is starting to come back, albeit with a slightly different experience. So yeah, look, I think certainly in Australia, you know, we're now offering 5G services in some stadia across Australia, and that's about enhancing the fan experience. So certainly at the MCG, ahead of the AFL Grand Final last year, that was very much a 5G experience for the fans who were gathered there, which is pretty cool. And things like IPTV and, you know, public Wi-Fi, you know, sitting in stadia backed onto 5G is obviously also really a thing that we're starting to see. But also, like for us, certainly across the international business, Telstra has a global media network that plays quite a significant role in distributing broadcasts around the world. So for example, the UFC came back as one of the first live sports
I did, yeah.
a few weeks ago, and we played a role in distributing that broadcast to parts of the world. And so we're excited to see broadcast come back, because it obviously is an important part of our business, but we also see that technology is going to play a really big role in terms of the overall sports experience for fans moving forward. And I think this is an area that's going to continue to be really innovative in the coming years ahead.
Well, and speaking about innovation, what innovations are Telstra investing in to support artificial intelligence right now?
Yeah, that's a big topic. It's
in 30 seconds, if you wouldn't mind.
AI has incredible potential. We're very excited about it as an organization. You know, we've made a lot of investments around 5G, around narrowband IoT in Australia. The potential is enormous. And if you think about 5G, IoT, you know, the ability to think around smart cities, smart agriculture, smart homes, smart grids, new ways of doing things, I think arguably 5G is going to create opportunities that maybe some of the best reasons where you have 5G are not even imagined yet. It's just going to create this innovation that is pretty exciting. And I think specific to AI, here in the United States, we also have a ventures business, Telstra Ventures. And one of their main focuses actually is investing in organizations when companies focused on AI. Given its importance as we see moving forward. And there's a handful of companies that we've invested here in the United States that are very much focused on AI. And, you know, and part of our Telstra Ventures portfolio plan is that we work with these companies, and where it makes sense to do so, we introduce them and we productize their offerings into the Australian market and across some of our international markets. So it's an area that absolutely we're excited about. And we look forward to seeing a lot more in this space. 30 seconds-ish.
Well, and I think that the interesting part about it too is that you have sort of a really intriguing new set of real world circumstances to solve through. You know, I think AI has always been important, but now you've got pretty much every condition in the world that we could have taken for granted has shifted. So what a great time to be, you know, thinking about innovation from that perspective.
Yeah, and what better place in the United States? Because so much of it is happening here, and certainly in the Bay Area, right? And this is where I think, you know, the connections between Australia and the Bay Area and the broader United States is so important, you know, for how we look at that innovation ecosystem as well.
No, absolutely. And it's wonderful to hear that there's a perspective of so much cross-pollination of ideas too. That's terrific to understand. So getting to maybe a little bit more of a difficult question, other than assuming that AI in 30 seconds was quite easy for you. So we've now got to take it up a notch here. Does being a global company and not a US one enhance or limit your ability to talk about things surrounding coronavirus or the Black Lives Matter movement? Can you talk a little bit about what that has been like for you in your role in Telstra, as so much has been happening, you know, at a local level here in the United States and globally?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So thank you for sharing that question. Look, I think for us, you know, and it gets back to our purpose and the values that we spoke about earlier. And Telstra is an incredibly value-led organization that takes responsible business incredibly seriously. And for us, then responsible means that you need to speak out on issues that do not necessarily sit right or align with those values. I think back a few years ago in Australia when we were having the debate around same-sex marriage equality.
Mm-hmm.
Telstra was one of a number of organizations, many organizations, in fact, that actually came out very much on the front and said that we will support this. You know, such as that we felt that aligned with our values, and, you know, it was a way that we could also show support to Telstra people and also to our customers as well. And I think, you know, whether it's around same-sex marriage equality or whether it's climate change, some of the work we're doing around domestic violence in Australia, but also the work we've done around reconciliation for Australia's Indigenous communities. It's all connected, because I'm not sure that it makes an enormous difference since we live in a very connected world. It's, you know, in a global world, it's these issues exist, you know, right across the globe. And as an organization that is global, we need to make sure that, you know, we embrace those values as well, and recognizing here in the United States, as it related to a lot of the conversations around Black Lives Matter, you know, our workforce here is largely American, and it's very important to them. And we had to make sure we created a safe space in our organization to have the conversation, and also recognizing that that conversation has also happened in quite a lot of other countries around the world as well, you know, following what happened here in the United States. And I think as business leaders and as organizations, we need to make sure we create a very safe space to enable these conversations to happen, but also to make sure our people are supported, because this can be incredibly emotional times. And I think if you look at the events of the last month or so around this topic, as well as the pandemic, the level of anxiety for a lot of people was at an all-time high. And as an organization, we've got a responsibility to make sure how we support people during this time as well, as different companies, I would suggest.
No, that's a great perspective. Does that tie back to, I guess, what you were talking about earlier with keeping close to your team and thinking about morale? You know, how do you grapple with that? You know, maybe not, you know, being more of a global company. Is it just looking at everything on a local level and having that perspective? I mean, it sounds like it's almost enhancing your ability to engage with topics as opposed to holding you back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've nailed it there perfectly. I think it's, you know, we try to look at issues as locally as we possibly can, because what's important necessarily for Telstra people and Telstra customers in the United States could be very different to the priorities that they see in Australia or our business in the UK, for example. So we stay very connected as a global business, but recognize that a lot of these issues we have to engage and coordinate locally. And I think the pandemic is also another great case in point, right? The situation here in the US is very different to other parts of our international business. So our response and the arrangements we put in place here is going to look different to what we may have in other parts of our business.
Well, and it's an interesting point. I mean, even the US isn't the US, right? It's state by state, in some cases city by city. So it really does require leaderships to be acting globally, but really thinking hyper local.
Yeah, oh, I like that. Hyperlocal, it's a good word. I might borrow that. But yeah, I think that's absolutely the intent.
So can you talk a little bit about, does Telstra come out stronger at the end of this crisis? Like, I know that we're not there yet, and there's a lot of conversation about post-COVID this and post-COVID that, but we had record highs on a global level, I think just yesterday. But does Telstra come out stronger at the end of this, and what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think we believe so, yes. And like, I think my own experience here leading the team here, like I believe we will come out stronger. I think the team is far more connected, arguably than before. And that's really strange thing to say, right? Given we're not seeing each other as much as possible. But I think that is a global statement for us as an organization, but perhaps also many others, that, you know, are forcing people, or this situation has forced people to think differently about how they work together. So I think the way teams are working together is really impressive. I think some of the feedback we get from our people is that they appreciate the support that has been available to them through COVID. And I think that's lived back to your purpose and your values. And I speak to people across many other companies, and I think they will share the same. I think most large organizations, you know, have done a reasonably good job, I think, in terms of adapting quickly to support people. But there's obviously still a long way to go. And I think for us as an organization, again, linked to the purpose, it's, you know, we just got to keep our laser focus on what do we need to do to ensure that we can help people stay connected, and continue the things that we were focused on beforehand as well. And, you know, our Telstra 2022 plan, which is basically reinventing and transforming Telstra as an organization, you know, absolutely continues. So, you know, despite everything, you still got to focus on what we want to be as an organization, you know, beyond this, but also well into the future.
Well, and that's an interesting point. You know, I think a lot of companies and people, because there's so much uncertainty on a day-to-day basis, are very much in survival mode. How do you kind of balance the immediacy of having to react with what's going on right now, but also look out on the horizon? Like, a lot of people be like, no, I can't look out to the horizon. I just want to make sure I can see what's in front of me. How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And it's something that is very front of mind for me as well, right? And I think it's about being mindful about your capacity of your people as well, you know, at this time. You know, arguably our plan hasn't changed, and our multi-year plan is the plan. It's we've had to adapt certain aspects in terms of how we think about things and how we do things. But I think for us, you know, being mindful of your people, where they are on this journey as well, is real. But also recognizing that, you know, things are also, business is still going on. You know, for us as a telecoms operator, like most telecommunications operators, the last 6 months has been incredibly busy. So at the same time, people and your customers are dealing with some very challenging situations. There are a lot of businesses and a lot of organizations who are arguably doing more than they ever have at the same time, trying to respond to all of this.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, you had the added pressure of keeping the world connected at a time when you know, a lot of things were changing at rapid speed. So that must have been quite an experience. I'm sure it must continue to be. So we're here to talk about business resilience, and I think we've covered that in great depth. But I'd love to know a little more about how you approach resilience as a leader. Because there's no business resilience without the resilience of the leaders of the team, which, you know, hopefully then flows to the people that you interact with. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to resilience throughout your career? You know, you've moved around a lot. You've taken on some very different responsibilities over the years, and I assume had to adapt very quickly. I'd love to just get a window into how you approach that.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. Yeah, look, I think for me, I think I'm naturally a very curious person, and I think, you know, probably one of the key things that I see as important, in terms of being resilient and adapting to change is looking to understand, what is the situation, just being curious to ask the right questions and being very open-minded to also what you hear through that journey. And I think there's so much that we've had to adapt to recently that, you have to be very open-minded, and you surround yourself with lots of points of view. You have to be prepared for the unexpected. That's for sure. But with the belief, in my view, that there's always optimism on the other side. I'm naturally a very optimistic person, so despite some of the things that get thrown at us, I like to believe that we can get through things, and sometimes you need to rally people around you to help you on that journey. I don't think sometimes this is a solo journey, and some of the things we've spoken about before around things around mental health, making sure that people around you, just because they're smiling may not be okay, or maybe nodding, but may not be okay. So also picking up the cues around you as well, as you think about adapting to change. But people, for me, arguably the most important thing. If I think through my career journey and working in some really amazing cities around the world, it's people who I draw from and inspire me. And I think that's one of the great opportunities we have through this episode, is to learn how to adapt to how we connect and value people as well.
What a wonderful tie-in, that a huge part of your responsibility is ensuring that people are in fact connected. So that must be a wonderful thing when it comes to purpose. Well, I think with that, I'm gonna hold here and just thank you so much, Nick, for joining us, here at the AAA and connecting our audience here in the United States and Australia together around Telstra's mission and what you've been doing throughout this crisis, and to also educate us on Telstra's purpose here in the United States, globally, and of course back home in Australia. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to our audience and for all of the wonderful questions that people sent through. I could really tell so much thought went into it. So thank you. There will be a recording available on the AAA website in the next 24 hours. So please look out for that. And just a reminder too, this is the third business resilience webinar. There will be more in this series coming throughout the year. No one, I'm sure this will be a very hard act to follow, but we've got some wonderful things in planning as well. So please look out for that. But again, thank you so much, Nick, for joining us. I know it meant so much to everyone that you took the time, and thank you to you all for being here with us this evening.
Thank you, Tania. Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care, everybody.